What does the Bible tell us about Ishmael? He was the first son of Abraham. God had made a promise to Abraham that one day he would have a son and become the ancestor of many nations. This promise is found in Genesis chapter 15. But as time passed, Abraham and his wife Sarah still had no children. Sarah was unable to conceive, and they started to question how God's promise would come true. In Genesis 16, Sarah suggested that Abraham have a child with her Egyptian servant, Hagar. At that time, it was common for a wife to give her servant to her husband to have children on her behalf, something that also happens later in the story of Jacob's family. In such cases, the child would be legally considered the wife's. It was, in a way, an early form of surrogacy. Abraham and Sarah likely saw this as a solution, but it only led to conflict. Hagar became pregnant with Abraham's child. After Hagar realized she was expecting, she began to look down on Sarah. Feeling hurt, Sarah went to Abraham to complain. Abraham told her to handle the situation as she thought best. So Sarah started treating Hagar harshly, and Hagar ended up fleeing. The name Ishmael. The name Ishmael means God hears, or may God listen. According to Genesis 16, Sarah had not been able to have children. She had an Egyptian maid named Hagar, and she said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go be with my servant. Maybe I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to her request. After they had lived in Canaan for 10 years, Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham as a wife. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. Once Hagar knew she was expecting, she began to treat Sarah with contempt. Sarah turned to Abraham and said, "This is your fault. I gave you my servant, and now that she's pregnant, she treats me with disrespect. May God judge between us." Abraham replied, "She's your servant. Do with her whatever you think is right." So Sarah began to treat Hagar very harshly, and Hagar eventually ran away. While she was in the desert, near a spring on the way to Shur, the angel of the Lord found her. He asked, "Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She answered, "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah." The angel told her, "Go back to your mistress and be humble before her." Then he added, "I will greatly increase your descendants. They will be so many that no one will be able to count them." The angel continued, "You're pregnant and will give birth to a son. You will name him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard how you've suffered." The angel also told her, "He will be a man who stands on his own. He will be in conflict with many, and others will be in conflict with him. He will live near all his relatives." Hagar then gave a name to the Lord who had spoken to her, saying, "You are the God who sees me," because she felt she had seen the one who watches over her. The spring was named Beer Lahai Roi, which is located between Kadesh and Bered. Later, Hagar gave birth to a son for Abraham, and Abraham named him Ishmael. At that time, Abraham was 86 years old. In those days, it wasn't unusual for a woman who couldn't have children to give her servant to her husband, so the family line could continue. The responsibility for raising the children was meant to fall on the wife, not a servant. Sarah, unable to have children, arranged for Hagar to bear a child for her, and by custom, Ishmael was considered Sarah's son. However, this doesn't fully explain why Sarah later treated Hagar harshly. Ishmael's early life. Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86 years old and living near Hebron. Genesis 16:16 NKJV. At that time, Abraham had settled among the oak trees of Mamre near Hebron and had built an altar to the Lord there. Genesis 13:18 NKJV. Hagar, Ishmael's mother, was Egyptian, and in a desperate moment, God reached out to her. When Ishmael turned 13, God made a covenant with Abraham. This agreement required that every male in his household be circumcised. Genesis 17:1 NKJV. When Abraham was 99, God appeared to him and said, "I am the Almighty. Live before me with integrity." Years later, once Isaac was born and had been weaned, Hagar and Ishmael were sent away. They wandered through the dry land near Beersheba. As they were close to death from lack of water, God heard Ishmael's cries and provided a spring for them. Ishmael continued to live in the desert, especially in the wilderness of Paran, with God watching over him. There, he became skilled with a bow. He later married an Egyptian woman, a connection that aligns with both his mother's background and their geographic closeness to Egypt. Even after being cast out, Ishmael remained connected to his family. He was present when Abraham passed away, helping Isaac bury their father. Genesis 25:9 NKJV. Isaac and Ishmael laid Abraham to rest in the cave of Machpelah, located near Mamre, on land that had been bought from Ephron the Hittite. Genesis 28:9. NKJV says that Esau, seeking a new wife, went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, Ishmael's daughter and sister of Nebajoth, adding her to his other wives. Ishmael lived for 137 years before passing away and being reunited with his people. God's words about Ishmael. God described Ishmael as a wild donkey, a symbol of a free, roaming life, hinting at his future as a desert nomad. Who gave freedom to the wild donkey? Who let the onager go untied? It lives in dry, empty places, far from cities and people. It pays no attention to the noise of the streets or the commands of those who try to control it. It roams freely across the mountains, always searching for anything green to eat. Because of this wild nature, he would always live differently from his more settled relatives. God gave him a special purpose, though it was outside the main promise. Ishmael was blessed by God to grow into a powerful nation, organized similarly to Israel, with 12 tribes. But unlike Israel, his path would not include a direct role in the covenant. This is explained in Genesis 17:20-21. When Abraham was 99 years old, God appeared to him and said, "I am the Almighty. Live in a way that honors me, and I will make a deep promise with you. I will greatly increase your family." Abraham bowed down, and God continued, "This is my promise to you. You will become the ancestor of many nations. From now on, your name won't be Abram, but Abraham, because I've made you the father of many peoples. Your family will grow very large. Some of your descendants will be kings. This promise I'm making with you will last forever. It will be passed on through your family, generation after generation. I will be your God and the God of your descendants. I will also give your family all the land of Canaan, even though you now live there as a foreigner. It will belong to your family forever, and I will always be their God." Then God told Abraham, "You must keep this promise, and so must your children and their children after them. This is the agreement I'm making with you and your family. Every boy among you must be circumcised. This act will be a physical sign of the promise between us. Starting from 8 days old, every male in your family must go through this, whether he's your own child or someone born in your home, even if he's been bought and isn't related to you by blood. This mark on your body will be a lasting symbol of our agreement. Any male who isn't circumcised will no longer be considered part of my people. He will have broken the covenant." God then said to Abraham, "As for your wife, you must stop calling her Sarai. From now on, her name will be Sarah. I will bless her, and she will give you a son. I will bless her even more, and she will become the mother of many nations. Kings will come from her line." Abraham bowed low, smiling to himself in disbelief. He thought, "Can a man who is 100 years old really have a child?" Can Sarah, at 90, become a mother?" Then he said to God, "I hope Ishmael can live under your care." But God replied, "No, Sarah will give you a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will make my everlasting covenant with him and his future family. But I've also heard your request about Ishmael. I will bless him too. He will have many descendants, and his family will grow into a great people. Ishmael will become the father of 12 leaders, and I will turn his people into a great nation. But my special promise will go through Isaac, the son Sarah will have for you at this time next year." After saying this, God finished speaking and left Abraham. Right away, Abraham gathered his son Ishmael, every male born in his household, and all the men he had bought. That very same day, just as God had told him, Abraham had every one of them circumcised. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and Ishmael was 13. On that exact day, Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised, along with all the other men in his home, whether they were born there or bought from foreigners. This moment shows the difference between being part of a great nation and actually taking part in the covenant. Both are important, but they're not the same. God repeats the promise of national greatness later in Genesis 21, verses 13 and 18. In Genesis 21:13, God says, "I will also make a nation from the son of the servant woman, because he is your child." And in verse 18, "Get up, help the boy, and hold his hand. I will make him a great nation." But Genesis 17:22-27 makes it clear that the covenant is about more than just circumcision. Even though circumcision was a sign of the agreement, it wasn't the agreement itself. Ishmael was circumcised just as God instructed, but he wasn't the son through whom the covenant would continue. Genesis 17:10 explains, "This is the agreement I'm making with you and your descendants. Every male must be circumcised." Still, being circumcised didn't automatically place someone inside the deeper promise God made with Abraham and Isaac. Abraham believed Ishmael was the son God had promised. So when God told him that Sarah would also have a son, Abraham didn't understand why Ishmael couldn't be the one to carry on the legacy. In Genesis 17:18, Abraham said to God, "If only Ishmael could live under your blessing." Even after Isaac was born, Abraham continued to care for Ishmael and was deeply upset when Sarah wanted him gone. Sarah, however, felt that Ishmael was a threat to Isaac's place in the family. She didn't want him growing up alongside her son. In Genesis 21, the Lord kept his word to Sarah. She became pregnant and gave Abraham a son, just as God had promised. Abraham named the boy Isaac, the child Sarah had given him in their old age. When Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, obeying God's command. Abraham was 100 years old at the time of Isaac's birth. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears this will laugh with me. Who would have ever believed I'd be nursing a child at this age? Yet here I am, giving Abraham a son in his old age." Isaac grew and was eventually weaned. On that day, Abraham held a large feast to celebrate. But during the celebration, Sarah saw Hagar's son, born to Abraham through the Egyptian servant, making fun of the moment. That was the final straw for her. She told Abraham, "Send this servant woman and her son away. Her son will not share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac." Abraham was very upset by this. After all, Ishmael was still his son. But God spoke to Abraham and said, "Don't be troubled about the boy or the servant woman." God told Abraham, "Do as Sarah says, because it's through Isaac that your family line will be known. But don't worry, I will also make a nation from the son of the servant woman, because he is still your child." So Abraham got up early the next morning. He prepared some food and a container of water, gave them to Hagar, and placed the supplies on her shoulder. He also gave her the boy, and then he sent them away. Hagar left and wandered through the desert near Beersheba. Before long, the water ran out. She placed the boy under a small bush and sat down a little distance away, thinking, "I can't bear to watch him die." She sat across from him, crying. But God heard the boy's voice, and an angel called out to Hagar from the sky, saying, "What's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy where he is. Get up, help him stand and hold his hand. I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well. She went to it, filled the water container, and gave her son a drink. God stayed with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became skilled with a bow. He made his home in the wilderness of Paran, and Hagar found him a wife from Egypt. Later, Abimelech and his army commander Phicol came to Abraham and said, "We know that God is with you in everything you do. Promise me now, in God's name, that you won't deceive me or my descendants. Treat me and this land where you've lived as kindly as I've treated you." Abraham agreed and said, "I promise." But then he confronted Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had taken by force. Abimelech replied, "I had no idea this had happened. You didn't tell me, and I hadn't heard anything about it until now." To settle the matter, Abraham took some sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech. The two men made an agreement. Then Abraham set aside 7 female lambs from the flock. Abimelech asked him, "What do these 7 lambs mean, standing apart from the others?" Abraham answered, "You will accept these lambs from me as proof that I was the one who dug this well." Because of this, the place was named Beersheba, which means well of the oath, since that's where they made their promise. After the agreement, Abimelech and his army commander Phicol went back to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and prayed to the Lord there, calling him the eternal God. Abraham stayed in that region for a long time. Now Sarah's demand to send away the servant woman and her son was highly unusual for that time. According to the customs of the day, children of servant women could lose their status, but it was rare and extreme for them to be completely expelled, especially without a serious reason. Abraham's reluctance to go along with Sarah's request and the fact that he acted only because God told him to shows that this action didn't follow normal practices of the time. This also raises the question, did Ishmael do something to truly threaten Isaac? Or was it simply his presence that made Sarah feel that Isaac's position was in danger? This debate centers around the word mezekek used in Genesis 21:9, where it says that Sarah saw Hagar's son born to Abraham, laughing or mocking. The exact meaning of that word has led to different interpretations. Some believe the word used to describe Ishmael's behavior, mezekek, means he was mocking Isaac. Others think it simply means he was playing with him. In fact, in the Old Testament, it's unclear whether the word ever truly meant to insult or ridicule someone. For example, in Judges 16:25, it says, "When the people were in high spirits, they called for Samson to entertain them. So he was brought from prison to perform, and they placed him between the pillars." In the same way, Sarah's concern may not have been about anything specific Ishmael did, but rather that he might challenge Isaac's position as the rightful heir. The purpose behind Ishmael's story. In Genesis, the story of Ishmael in Genesis isn't just about who he was. It's meant to show a deeper contrast between Ishmael and Isaac. The writer doesn't focus on them as individuals, but as symbols of how God works. The main point is that when God keeps his promises, he isn't limited by what's normal or expected. God didn't follow the rules of nature or tradition. Choosing Isaac, the son of Abraham's wife, was a familiar practice. But the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael helped underline that God's plan was unique and intentional. Ishmael's descendants. Ishmael's children are listed in the Bible in both Genesis and 1 Chronicles. In Genesis 25:12 through 16, it says, "This is the family line of Ishmael, Abraham's son, born to him through Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian servant. These are the names of Ishmael's sons, listed by their generations. Nebajoth, Ishmael's firstborn, followed by Kedar, Adbil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These 12 sons became the leaders of their own tribes, each with their own towns and settlements. 1 Chronicles 1:29-31 repeats the same genealogy, confirming their place in history. Ishmael's first son was Nebajoth, followed by Kedar, Adbil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. In total, Ishmael had 12 sons. What stands out is that the number of his sons matches exactly the 12 sons of Jacob. This pattern of 12 also appears with Nahor and Esau, who each had 12 sons as well. According to Genesis 22:21 through 24, Nahor's children included Haz, his firstborn, then Buz, Kemuel, the father of Aram, and others like Pildash and Bethuel, who became the father of Rebekah. In total, Milcah bore 8 sons, and Nahor's concubine Reumah gave birth to 4 more. The Bible also describes Ishmael's sons not just as a family, but as leaders. Genesis 25:16 calls them 12 princes, each ruling over their own tribe, towns, and settlements. These groups eventually formed nations and settled in the region where Ishmael had lived, the wilderness of Paran. Genesis 25:18 gives more detail, explaining that Ishmael's descendants lived from Havilah to Shur, an area east of Egypt, heading toward Assyria. Some of their names even appear in records from Assyrian history, showing that they became recognized tribes. As foretold, Ishmael passed away surrounded by his family. His legacy lived on through his sons and their tribes. However, tensions between the Ishmaelites and the Israelites did exist. For example, 1 Chronicles 5:19 mentions battles between the tribes of Israel and Ishmaelite groups like the Hagrites, Jetur, Naphish, and Nodab. Genesis 16:12 had already hinted at this kind of conflict, describing Ishmael as someone who would live in constant struggle with those around him. The prophecy about Ishmael described him as a man who would live like a wild nomad. He would often be in conflict with others, and others would clash with him, yet he would remain close to his family and their descendants. Over time, the Ishmaelites became closely associated with the Midianites, who were descendants of Keturah. In some parts of the Bible, these two groups are even treated as one. For example, in Genesis 37:25-28, Joseph's brothers sold him to a group of traders described both as Ishmaelites and Midianites. Later, in Genesis 37:36 and 39:1, it says Joseph was taken to Egypt by these same traders. Because both names are used to describe the same group, there's no need to treat the Ishmaelites and Midianites as two completely separate groups in this story. In Judges 8:24, Gideon refers to his enemies as Ishmaelites, asking his men to give him gold earrings taken from them after battle. These earrings are mentioned specifically because Ishmaelites were known for wearing gold. Going back to the story in Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers sat down for a meal and looked up to see a caravan of Ishmaelites approaching. They were coming from Gilead, carrying goods like spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to Egypt. Judah then said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother and hiding what we've done? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites instead. After all, he is our brother. our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. Then a group of Midianite merchants came by, and the deal was made. Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 silver coins. The traders took Joseph with them down to Egypt. Genesis 37:36. Later, the Midianites, who were part of the same caravan, sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court and captain of the guard. Genesis 39:1 explains that Potiphar, an Egyptian official, bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. Paul's use of the Ishmael story. In the New Testament, Paul refers back to the story of Ishmael and Isaac to make a deeper point, even though he doesn't mention Ishmael by name. In Galatians 4, Paul draws from the Genesis account to contrast two kinds of birth, one through human effort, the flesh, and one through God's promise, the Spirit. In Galatians 4:29, Paul writes, "Just as the one born through human effort attacked the one born by the Spirit, the same thing still happens today." Paul follows that verse with a quote from Genesis 21:10, where Sarah says to Abraham, "Send away the servant woman and her son. Her son will not share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac." This shows that Paul was clearly thinking of the Genesis story when he wrote about conflict between the two sons. To him, Ishmael represented the old way, based on human plans, while Isaac stood for God's promise and spiritual freedom.